welcome to Meeting Midway Tier 2 Prevention, hosted by the Missouri Department of Mental Health. My name is Carl Honecker, and I will be your chaperone as we walk together through Tier 2 supports. What is it? How does it work? What does it use, and how do we use it? Together, we'll do a deep dive with each episode into this topic to gain greater knowledge about this subject. At the end of each episode, it's hoped that you'll have a greater understanding about Tier 2 supports and see how it relates to your daily lives. And with that, let's move on to the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of Meeting Midway. On this episode, you just have me going over what may be the most difficult yet important topic to cover, and that is the importance and reason why we need data. This episode by no means offers a full account of what data is, its needs, or what good or bad data is. But hopefully it does give some insight on the importance of data and makes you consider its importance and makes it more relatable to your needs. So let's dive right in. Let's start off by operationally defining what we mean by data for this episode. This term is a bit fuzzy, as it could mean and be used in a lot of different scenarios. For example, there is quantitative data and qualitative data. Quantitative data deals with counts, numbers, and figures, while qualitative data is more narrative or provides written summaries without the use of numerical numbers. Both have their strengths and weaknesses, and both are forms of data. So given this, we'll offer two definitions on what data is or how we might want to think about data moving forward. The first definition comes from Merriam-Webster Dictionary. We pulled this definition as it is the most commonly and broad definition of data that we could find. Here it states, 1. Factual information such as measurement or statistics, used as a basis for reasoning, discussion, or calculation. 2. Information in digital form that can be transmitted or processed. Or 3. Information output by a sensing device or organ that includes both useful and irrelevant or redundant information and must be processed to be meaningful. A big part of this definition that we found interesting was the use of measurement and statistics. And when we looked through the ABA definitions on data, we decided to pull the definition that is used for measurements according to Cooper and colleagues. So for our second definition, according to Cooper and colleagues, measurement is a process of applying quantitative labels to describe and differentiate objects and natural events. They go on to further state, measurement in applied behavioral analysis entails 3 steps. First, identifying the behavior to be measured, defining behavior in observable terms, and third, selecting an appropriate observation and data recording method. Using both definitions, we can say this about data and measurements. Data and measurement is information. It tells us something. It might be presented in various forms, such as numerical measurements, written descriptions of observations, or in a visual graph. Data also helps identify patterns and provides greater insight for the situation at hand. Data can see if progress is being made, whether a process is working as planned, or whether we are affecting an intended change. There are other elements that we'll mention in a bit too, but data also allows us to routinely monitor our systems and processes, which we'll go over in a little bit more detail later. We also wanted to make these points from Cooper and colleagues as well. In talking about measurements, they state, measurements help practitioners optimize their effectiveness. It also enables practitioners to verify legitimacy of treatments touted as evidence-based. Third, measurements help practitioners identify and terminate treatments based on pseudosciences, fads, factions, or ideology. Measurements help practitioners be accountable to clients, customers, employees, and society. Lastly, measurements help practitioners achieve ethical standards. With all this in mind, let's move on to why it's important to collect and review data. Some of these were already answered in our definitions above, but let's restate them again to drive these points home. Data helps us make decisions. Often we use data to make decisions to improve outcomes or minimize obstacles we may face in the future. An example of this we can think of would be the most recent COVID pandemic. During this period, a lot of data was collected and presented that aided in decision-making for those managing the crisis. Without this data, the pandemic could have been much worse, and poor decision-making may have occurred. Second, data helps us monitor progress for whatever we are implementing. For example, identifying whether improvements or no improvements have occurred over time. This relates to decision making and its goals of trying to improve outcomes in the future. For example, if you are working at the Tier 2 intervention level, you may be working to improve outcomes for people you support. You'll collect data and implement a targeted intervention. After establishing a foundation for the intervention, you collect and routinely review the data collected to see if progress is being made. Through the data collected, you may see patterns or trends moving in the right direction. You can then say that the intervention is presumably having an effect. If no pattern of improvement are visible upon review, then several things may be at your disposal. First, you need to ensure the data collected is being collected in the way that is intended. Second, ensure staff are implementing as they should with fidelity or as intended. Third, tweak the targeted intervention to see if this results in a change. And fourth, discontinue the intervention and review if additional interventions or services may be beneficial. Lastly, data is important as it allows us to monitor the health of our processes and systems and ensure sustainability. Think of this situation. Agency A hires 20 employees each year. They directly collect data on staff training, observations, and so forth, and review this data each quarter. When an issue is discovered, they implement specific interventions to get the agency back on track. They're able to make a better educated decision about the problem because of the data and the way it was collected. Agency B also hires 20 new employees each year. They collect some data passively and make sure each staff receives their necessary training, but nothing further. They do not review this data quarterly. Several situations are occurring within this agency that need attention. However, no one can pinpoint where to start. So they implement a broad intervention they hope will fix the issue. It doesn't, and the agency system continues to run improperly. Which agency do you think will have the better work culture and stronger business model? If you think Agency A, you are correct, as they are using data in a meaningful way and not just collecting data for the sake of marking off a box. This leads into my next question: how can we use data? We've already seen how we can use data to maintain systems and processes, ensure fidelity is being met, and how it helps with decision making. But let's pull apart 3 additional areas on how we can use data. First, data can be used to improve current systems. How may you ask? Well, data just by itself is just that. It's data. However, if we actively review the data, not every day, but at least once a month or even once a quarter, we can see if things are either being maintained, struggling, or moving in the right direction. Additionally, we may see where there might be gaps in our current systems that need better refinement and or polishing. Through this scheduled review session, teams can discover areas and thus further enhance the overall system if gaps are located. Second, specific data helps remove bias. Often, we may have blinders on specific issues and believe certain things are occurring. When we're presented with numerical data, provided it's good data, which we'll talk about here shortly, we can see that our initial assumptions and our biases were incorrect. An example of this is believing only what is told to you by those closest to you without any data to support it. Please know that numerical data is best suited for this, but this does not remove the importance of narrative data, which can provide context on the specific situation as well. Thirdly, data, both numerical and narrative, provide context of a situation and offer insight into why things might be or are occurring. When we do not use data, we are left to our own devices and assumptions that, as mentioned before, may be biased or lead us into poor decision making. In using data this way, it allows individuals and teams to see larger spans of issues rather than smaller focused areas. Given everything that we've gone over thus far, let's explore what may be good data and what is bad data. First, good data should answer smart questions and should arrive at smart data. S-M-A-R-T, I mean S for specific, meaning there should be clear definitions and a focus on what we want the data to collect. What is our end goal, and what do we want to know more about? M for measurement means we should be able to measure it easily and pull the data into graphs for later review. Numerical data is easier to graph and visually analyze, which helps us spot patterns and/or trends. Narrative data has a place too, but does not offer the same graphing ability as numerical data. A for achievement or attainability means it should be things that we can easily obtain and not out of our reach. In other words, the data should be easily collected and within our scope and abilities to obtain it. R for relevant, meaning it should answer and add insight and/or answers to our SMART question. If we are trying to answer how best to grow a tree, should we collect data on how many birds live in the tree as well, or should we collect data on the temperature outside, amount of rainfall, etc.? Lastly, T for time bound. This means we are either assigning a specific time frame for collecting data, for example, in isolated focus instances, or collecting data across time periods, for example, each day, every week, monthly, quarterly, etc. Some data is going to be collected daily, while others may be weekly, monthly, or quarterly. For these latter three, think of specific trainings you provide to your staff, and you want to track and ensure they are occurring. These are not happening daily, but perhaps monthly. If you would like to learn more about SMART, please see the show notes below for these examples and additional articles. But additionally, to making questions and data smart, we also need additional components. According to Tammy Coslin in The Bad Data Problem, to ensure that we have good data, we first need to address what she calls gaps in data governance. In other words, how is the data defined? Who has access to the data? Who inputs the data? And who manages the data? She offers that for data to be good at its source, it needs to have accuracy, relevance, completeness, and consistency. Furthermore, we say that data needs to be reliable and it has to be valid. According to McCausland, to achieve this, teams need to strive to prevent minor errors at the beginning. This means that the data has to be collected with fidelity every time. The clearest way to achieve this is by ensuring staff are educated and trained on how to collect and enter the data, but also educated on some data literacy as well. She goes on to mention that the collection of data needs to be monitored to ensure it is of the quality that the organization desires, and lastly, that tweaks may be needed here and there. Finally, she mentions that leaders must understand the data collected, but also understand what the data can do and what it cannot do. Moving on to Brown and colleagues in Issues with Data and Analysis, Errors, Underlining Themes, and Potential Solutions, we learned that when there is bad data, the way to correct it into good data includes educating staff on data collection and input, having gatekeepers to review and ensure the data is of good quality, include incentive systems, and increase resources. The key takeaway on good data is that it should address smart questions and, based on these articles, there needs to be education for the staff and the staff who monitor the data as well. So let's move on to what is bad data. You may have already guessed that bad data is anything that does not address smart questions, which is correct. But there are other factors that contribute to bad data, and these include the following. First, McCausland states that data can be bad, firstly, at its source if things are wrong, secondly, if it is biased and non-neutral, or third, subject to manipulation. Moving on to Brown and colleagues, data can suffer from several different errors that fall under three broad categories. These include 1. Poor design and analysis reporting, 2. Invalidated errors, and 3. Researchers should have known better. Brown and colleagues go on further to explain that bad data can be defined as those acquired through erroneous or sufficiently low quality collection methods, study design, or sampling techniques, such that their use to address a particular scientific question is scientifically unjustifiable. They offer several areas where data may produce errors and thus give bad data. Errors in data management, errors in statistical analysis, errors in logic, or errors in communication. We would like to also throw out an additional way that data may be bad, and that is if the data has reliability errors. So having gone through all these, we can see that data needs to have a specific purpose, training must be provided to staff who are collecting the data must answer smart questions, and it needs to be reviewed and monitored routinely. Failure to do so will lead to poor decision-making and additional struggles down the road for any organization that is collecting data. In saying all this, for this episode we've gone over a lot of information about data. Now let's end the show with any potential tools that the listeners might find useful. First, we need to ingrain and internalize SMART, S-M-A-R-T. We've provided a link to SMART goals in the show notes below, in addition to other SMART resources the audience might find useful. Secondly, we're including the agency tier support SMART goals data document that listeners may find useful. Third, this is not really a tool or resource, but we would recommend organizations consider investing in an electronic data management application. This allows data to be close to real time as possible, as well as make it easier to aggregate and analyze the data to make decisions on monitoring processes. If you're currently collecting data on paper and pen format, we highly recommend that you invest in an electronic data management application system. Fourth, while this is not an outside resource or a tool that you can use, but one that you'll need to create on your own, we recommend organizations build specific policies and procedures around data collection. For example, what do you want to collect information on? When and how will staff be trained on the data collection and entry? How will we know staff are completing the entry the appropriate way after their training? How will the data be reviewed and how often? By whom and when will it be reviewed, and at what meeting? Taking these initial steps will offer tremendous benefits to you and to your organization beyond the road to better data collection and better data. Fifth, we highly recommend that you connect with Tier 1 and Tier 2 from the Missouri Department of Mental Health. These are completely free resources for any Missouri organization that wants to enhance their systems and make their agency thrive. For example, Tier 1 is the universal and foundational tier of MTSS. Through Tier 1, you'll work with positive behavioral consultants to enhance your systems in data collection, coaching, trainings, and various other resources. They will provide consultation to your organization, and they also offer virtual and in-person workshops. So we highly recommend this as a resource. Tier 2 also provides consultation and ongoing virtual workshops in addition to on-demand learning. Lastly, I would recommend going back and listening to previous podcasts we have done to gain greater context and understanding of this topic. Previous episodes that we would highly recommend include Episode 9, Action Planning, Episode 14, Tier 2 Risk Screening, Episode 18, TSET, and Episode 21, Tiered Fidelity Tools. Again, these are additional resources that we think the listeners might find useful and provide greater context for this episode. And with that, we would like to thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode. And we hope that you gained a little bit more knowledge about why data is needed, its importance, and how it can help your organization. And with that, we look forward to touching base again next month. Thanks. Hey everyone, this concludes our show. Thank you for stopping by to learn more about Tier 2 supports and taking a deep dive into this topic with me. If you enjoyed the show, learned something, or perhaps feeling generous, please feel free to hit the like and subscribe feature to receive additional information on shows as they come out in the near future. And with that, please remember to be hopeful, bold, and adventurous in all that you do. Take care, everyone. Bye.